Every day, millions of Britons chase a dream that seems to slip further away, owning a home. The numbers are staggering. House prices have soared to more than 8 times the average income, while wages remain stuck in place. Families pay more in rent than a mortgage would cost. Yet saving for a deposit feels impossible. From foreign investors to strict lending rules, the system is stacked against ordinary people. The question is no longer when you can buy, but if you ever will. Britain's housing crisis isn't coming, it's already here, and it's reshaping the lives of an entire generation. Number 10. Rent trap and lack of savings. Perhaps the most relentless obstacle to home ownership in Britain is the rent trap. Millions of people spend a huge portion of their monthly income on rent, often between 30% and 50%, leaving little to no room for savings. Unlike a mortgage, where payments gradually build equity, rent is money gone forever, flowing into the pockets of landlords without improving the tenants' long-term prospects. This constant outflow makes it nearly impossible for renters to save the large deposits required to buy a home. Even those who carefully budget and cut back on essentials find themselves stuck, as any progress towards savings is erased by rising rents and unexpected expenses. The trap is compounded by the fact that rental prices often rise faster than wages. In many cities, particularly London, Birmingham and Manchester, renters pay more each month than they would on a mortgage for the same property. Yet banks still demand deposits they cannot accumulate. This paradox forces people into a cycle where they can clearly afford the cost of home ownership, but are prevented from proving it in the way lenders require. The financial system offers no relief, and landlords benefit from the status quo. For young adults and low to middle income families, the rent trap is a barrier as immovable as any policy or law, ensuring they remain permanent tenants in a market designed to keep them out. Beyond the financial struggle, the psychological burden of the rent trap cannot be ignored. Families feel as though they are working hard, yet going nowhere, with no realistic way to escape renting. This lack of security affects life choices, from starting families to planning retirements. As people cannot rely on stable housing for their future, the trap breeds frustration and hopelessness, creating a generation that sees home ownership not as a goal to work toward, but as a dream forever beyond. For millions, the rent trap has become the clearest symbol of Britain's housing crisis, a system that takes relentlessly, offers no path forward, and locks them out of the stability previous generations. Number 9. Generational divide in wealth. One of the clearest reasons millions will never own homes in Britain lies in the generational divide in wealth. For those who purchased property in the 1970s, 80s, or even 90s, houses were relatively affordable compared to income levels. Many older homeowners benefited from decades of rising property values, watching their assets multiply in worth while paying off mortgages under far easier conditions. By contrast, today's young adults face house prices that are several times higher than their annual income, making ownership feel almost impossible. The disparity between what previous generations paid and what the younger generation faces is stark, creating a sense of inequality that fuels frustration and resentment. This divide has also shifted how wealth is distributed within families. Older generations often hold property worth hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, while younger people remain locked out of the market entirely. For many, the only path to home ownership now depends on inheritance or financial help from parents and grandparents. Those without such support are left behind, regardless of their career success or financial discipline. This dynamic entrenches inequality, ensuring that property ownership is increasingly concentrated in families with existing wealth, while millions of others remain permanent renters. It is no longer just about hard work or careful saving. It is about whether someone is fortunate enough to be born into the right household. The broader social consequences of this generational wealth gap are significant. Communities become divided between those who can build security through property and those who cannot. Younger generations delay milestones such as starting families, investing in communities, or saving for retirement, because so much of their income is consumed by rent and living costs. Meanwhile, older generations often rely on the wealth tied to their homes to support their later years, further reinforcing property as the dividing line of opportunity. This widening gap highlights a troubling reality. Home ownership in Britain is no longer a universal aspiration, but a privilege tied to generational timing. For millions, This divide ensures that owning a home will remain an unattainable goal. Number 8. Rise of temporary and insecure jobs. A growing barrier to home ownership in Britain is the rise of insecure employment. Over the last 2 decades, the labour market has shifted dramatically, with zero-hour contracts, gig work, and short-term roles replacing the stability of traditional full-time jobs. While these arrangements provide flexibility for some, they strip workers of the financial certainty needed to qualify for a mortgage. Banks want evidence of steady income over years, yet millions of workers now juggle unpredictable schedules, fluctuating pay, and little long-term security. For those trapped in this new employment model, the dream of owning a home is undermined not by lack of effort, but by the changing nature of work itself. This insecurity directly clashes with the rigid expectations of lenders. Someone working multiple jobs in retail, delivery, or hospitality may bring in enough money to cover mortgage payments, but without a consistent payslip history, they are seen as too risky. Even professionals on short-term contracts in industries like education, healthcare, or the arts encounter barriers, despite earning decent wages. The financial system has not adapted to modern work patterns, leaving millions unfairly excluded. Instead of recognizing income potential, it punishes anyone outside the narrow definition of stable employment. This disconnect traps hard-working people in the rental market, where high monthly costs make it impossible to save for a deposit. The emotional toll of this system is profound. Workers feel punished for economic realities beyond their control, forced into a cycle of renting even when they could afford to buy. The rise of insecure jobs means fewer people can plan for the future, start families, or invest in communities. Ownership becomes a reward reserved for those with permanent contracts or inherited wealth, while others remain stuck on the margin. This shift has created a widening social divide, a Britain where work no longer guarantees security, and where millions who contribute daily to the economy are denied the basic stability of a home to call their own. Employment patterns, once a source of opportunity, have become a silent barrier, locking millions out of the housing ladder. Number 7. Limited land and strict planning laws. One of the most persistent obstacles to home ownership in Britain is the issue of limited land and restrictive planning laws. The country's geography is small compared to its population, and a significant portion of land is protected by greenbelt regulations. While these rules were originally created to preserve the environment and prevent urban sprawl, they have unintentionally contributed to the housing crisis. Developers face tight restrictions on where new homes can be built, which slows down construction and keeps supply far below demand. When demand is high but new stock is scarce, prices rise relentlessly, leaving buyers with fewer affordable options. The slow and bureaucratic nature of Britain's planning system further complicates matters. Local councils often face years of delays when processing applications for new housing developments, bogged down by red tape and community objections. While residents may fear that new housing will strain resources or alter the character of their neighbourhoods, the cumulative effect is a national shortage of homes. Builders, frustrated by endless negotiations and rising costs, frequently abandon projects before a single brick is laid. The result is a pipeline that delivers far fewer homes than needed each year, exacerbating shortages and keeping millions priced out of ownership. This imbalance between supply and demand extends beyond the major cities. Even in rural areas where space seems abundant, planning restrictions can prevent the construction of affordable housing. Wealthier buyers often scoop up limited stock for second homes or holiday properties, leaving local families unable to compete. The combination of scarce land, protective laws, and bureaucratic hurdles locks the market in a cycle of scarcity. Without significant reform, Britain will continue producing fewer homes than it needs, ensuring that ownership remains a privilege for the few rather than a possibility for the many. For millions of hopeful buyers, restrictive land policies make the dream of securing a home an uphill battle against both policy and scarcity. Number 6. Mortgage barriers and stricter lending rules. After the financial crisis of 2008, banks across Britain changed the way they handled mortgage lending. Gone were the days when buyers could secure large loans with minimal checks or low deposits. In their place came stricter lending rules, higher deposit requirements, and far more detailed scrutiny of applicants' financial histories. On paper, These measures were designed to protect both lenders and borrowers from risky debt. In practice, however, they created an additional barrier for millions of aspiring homeowners. Even those with steady incomes often find themselves rejected if their credit history is not perfect or if they cannot demonstrate years of consistent savings. For younger buyers without family support, the path to securing a mortgage often ends before it begins. The deposit requirement alone has become a near insurmountable obstacle. In many parts of Britain, the average deposit for a first-time buyer is now over. For someone paying high rent and covering rising living expenses, saving such a sum can take more than a decade. Many young adults must rely on the so-called bank of mum and dad, where parents provide lump sums to bridge the gap. Yet, this option is not available to everyone, meaning ownership becomes heavily dependent on family wealth rather than individual effort. The system increasingly favors those who are already advantaged, leaving millions excluded no matter how hard they work or save. Even when buyers manage to scrape together a deposit, passing affordability tests can be equally challenging. Lenders assess whether applicants can handle repayments not just at current interest rates, but at hypothetical higher ones. While designed to safeguard against future shocks, these tests disqualify many who could realistically manage a mortgage that costs less than their monthly rent. This paradox, where people can afford expensive rents but not qualify for lower mortgage payments, illustrates the rigidity of the system. For countless would-be buyers, stricter lending criteria have transformed the dream of ownership into a maze of requirements that they can never quite satisfy. Mortgage barriers now stand as one of the strongest walls, separating renters from the stability of home ownership. Number 5. Foreign investment in property. In recent years, Britain, particularly London, has become a magnet for foreign investment in property. Wealthy individuals and corporations from abroad see British real estate as a safe place to store capital, often with guaranteed long-term returns. Luxury apartments, high-rise towers, and even suburban properties are bought, not as homes, but as financial assets. This inflow of global money inflates prices far beyond what local incomes can sustain. As demand from overseas buyers grows, domestic buyers are left facing an even steeper climb to ownership. The property market, once tied closely to local wages and community needs, has increasingly detached itself from the economic realities of those who live and work in Britain. The effects of foreign investment are most visible in London, where entire blocks of flats stand half empty, serving as safe deposit boxes in the sky. These properties are legally owned, yet many remain unoccupied, creating a sense of artificial scarcity. With fewer homes available for actual residents, competition intensifies for the limited supply that does reach the open market. This drives up prices not just in the capital, but also across nearby regions, as buyers priced out of London move outward. Cities like Birmingham, Cambridge, and Leeds now experience similar ripple effects, where rising costs mirror the patterns seen in London. Local families, unable to match the financial firepower of international investors, find themselves permanently edged out of ownership. This phenomenon also shifts how housing is valued. Instead of being judged on livability, location, or community, properties are increasingly measured by their investment potential and resale value on the global stage. The more Britain attracts this kind of capital, the more it entrenches a system that benefits overseas buyers while excluding ordinary citizens. For millions of would-be homeowners, the challenge is no longer just about saving or securing a mortgage. It is about competing with an international marketplace where wealth flows freely, but opportunities for locals do not. Foreign investment has become one of the most visible barriers to home ownership, cementing a housing environment where millions will never have a fair chance to buy. Number 4. Buy-to-let boom and investor domination. Over the past 3 decades, the rise of the buy-to-let market has reshaped Britain's housing landscape. What began as a small-scale investment opportunity grew into a nationwide trend, with landlords purchasing properties not to live in, but to rent out for profit. This shift fundamentally altered competition in the housing market. First-time buyers, already struggling with rising prices and limited savings, suddenly found themselves bidding against investors with far greater financial leverage. Landlords, often able to secure multiple mortgages and reinvest rental income, were positioned to dominate. As more properties were absorbed into this cycle, the dream of ownership slipped further from reach for ordinary working families. The impact of investor-driven housing is visible in every corner of the country. Whole neighborhoods in university towns, commuter belts, and city centers have been transformed into rental-heavy areas, leaving fewer opportunities for owner-occupiers. The focus has moved away from creating stable communities to maximizing financial return. In many cases, landlords buy up affordable homes, leaving only high-end properties or poorly maintained rentals available for others. This has created a housing environment where younger people often pay high rents to fund the mortgages of landlords, while being unable to build equity themselves. The imbalance not only squeezes tenants financially, but also deepens resentment toward a system that appears rigged in favor of those with existing wealth. The buy-to-let boom also accelerated rising property prices across the nation. With investors driving demand, housing increasingly became an asset class rather than a basic human need. Homes are treated like stocks, valued for their potential yield rather than their role in providing shelter. This shift in perspective has severe long-term consequences, ensuring that ownership is concentrated among fewer, wealthier individuals. For millions, the idea of competing with landlords who view housing as an investment portfolio is unrealistic. The result is a generation trapped in renting, where wealth flows upward and ownership becomes less about hard work and more about being positioned in the right era of housing policy. Number 3. Decline of social housing. Britain once prided itself on providing affordable council homes to millions of working-class families. After World War II, large-scale social housing projects offered security and stability for people who might otherwise have been locked out of the housing market. Over the decades, however, this foundation has crumbled. Policies such as Right to Buy, introduced in the 1980s, allowed tenants to purchase council homes at discounted rates. While this benefited many families at the time, it also meant that millions of properties were sold without being replaced. Today, the stock of social housing is drastically reduced, leaving far fewer affordable options for those who need them most. The consequences of this decline are visible across the country. Long waiting lists for council housing have become the norm, with families waiting years or even decades for a secure tenancy. Those who cannot wait are pushed into the private rental sector, where prices are far higher and conditions often less stable. This shift has left vulnerable groups, such as low-income families, single parents, and the elderly, facing housing insecurity. Many spend a disproportionate share of their income on rent, which prevents them from saving for a deposit and keeps the dream of home ownership permanently out of reach. The safety net that once supported millions has become threadbare, creating a cycle of poverty and dependence on costly rental arrangements. The lack of social housing has also driven up demand in the private sector, fueling price increases across the market. When affordable alternatives disappear, renters compete fiercely for limited options, allowing landlords to raise rents further. This in turn widens the wealth gap, as property owners accumulate wealth while renters fall behind. For millions, social housing is no longer a realistic pathway to stability or ownership. It is a vanished opportunity. The erosion of this system is one of the clearest reasons why home ownership in Britain has become unattainable for so many, and why the divide between property owners and renters continues to deepen with each passing year. Number 2. Stagnant, wages and cost of living crisis. While housing prices have continued to soar, wages in Britain have barely moved when adjusted for inflation. Over the past 2 decades, real wages for most workers have remained flat, leaving households with less financial flexibility. Even when employees receive pay raises, they often fail to keep pace with the rising costs of everyday essentials. This means that the ability to save for a deposit or make long-term financial plans is increasingly out of reach. Families working tirelessly find themselves running in place, with no measurable progress toward home ownership despite years of effort. The problem is not simply about personal budgeting, but about a national wage system that has left millions behind. At the same time, the cost of living has risen sharply, creating a financial squeeze that touches every corner of daily life. Energy bills have surged, food prices are higher than ever, and public transportation remains costly compared to wages. For many households, housing costs are not the only financial burden they carry. The choice often becomes whether to pay rising rents, keep up with energy bills, or set aside even the smallest amount toward a down payment. Each year, savings accounts are drained by inflationary pressures, forcing people to abandon long-term goals in favor of short-term survival. The harsh reality is that even middle-income families are struggling to maintain stability, let alone prepare for one of the largest purchases of their lives. This combination of stagnant wages and rising living costs traps individuals in a cycle that feels impossible to break. Without meaningful wage growth, even modest homes remain unattainable, and without relief from escalating expenses, saving becomes nearly impossible. The situation breeds frustration and fuels generational divides, as younger people realize that hard work alone is no longer enough to secure the foundation of financial security their parents enjoyed. The result is a population increasingly resigned to lifelong renting, with ownership becoming the privilege of those with family wealth or extraordinary circumstances. The crisis is not just economic, but emotional, eroding the sense of progress and fairness that once defined the path to home ownership in Britain. Number 1. Soaring house prices outpace wages. For decades, house prices in Britain have risen at a pace that far outstrips the growth of wages. The average cost of a home is now more than 8 times the average annual salary, compared to around 3 times in the 1970s. This widening gap creates a situation where even those with stable, full-time jobs are unable to reach the threshold needed for a mortgage. For many, the dream of home ownership is no longer about ambition, but about mathematics that simply does not add up. When a deposit alone can cost the equivalent of several years of after-tax income, younger generations feel shut out before they even begin. The challenge is magnified in major cities, particularly London, Manchester and Bristol, where demand far exceeds supply. Here, bidding wars push properties tens of thousands above the asking price, while ordinary buyers watch opportunities slip through their fingers. The imbalance is not limited to urban areas. Even smaller towns and rural communities have seen price surges as remote work has encouraged wealthier buyers to relocate. This shift leaves locals competing against buyers with higher incomes or existing equity, turning once affordable regions into high-cost zones. For millions, the landscape is shaped by constant competition and rising benchmarks they can never meet. At the heart of this issue lies a structural problem. Housing has been treated as an asset rather than a necessity. Investors, developers, and homeowners with multiple properties benefit from rising values, while aspiring first-time buyers are forced to chase a moving target. As wages stagnate and inflation eats away at disposable income, the dream of owning a home becomes less attainable every year. Without intervention, the divide will only grow, creating a two-tier society where property ownership is concentrated among the fortunate few, while the majority remain locked in cycles of renting, saving, and watching prices climb out of reach. Britain's housing crisis is not a single issue, but a web of challenges that lock millions out of ownership. From soaring prices and stagnant wages to the decline of social housing and the dominance of investors, the dream of owning a home has become a privilege rather than a standard milestone of adult life. Each barrier reinforces the next, creating a cycle where ordinary families are left paying high rents, unable to save, and watching the market move further out of reach. For younger generations especially, the path to stability feels blocked at every turn. Housing has shifted from being a basic need to a financial asset, leaving ownership concentrated in the hands of older generations, investors, and the wealthy. The result is a society increasingly divided between those who benefit from rising property values and those who can never get on the ladder. Without major reform, this divide will only deepen, reshaping communities and eroding the sense of fairness that once defined opportunity in Britain. The crisis is not just about economics, it is about the future. A nation where millions will never own homes risks losing more than stability. It risks losing hope itself.